right. Well, the president said, sign me up. I'm willing to help out any way I can to make sure we control both bodies of Congress, the House and the Senate. But right now, the winds are not blowing Republicans' way, particularly the special election in Wisconsin that typically had gone Republican for as long as anyone could remember. Then Scott Walker, the governor there, referred to a defeat in a special district race in District 10, won by a Democrat, as something that the governor said should be a wake-up call for Republicans in Wisconsin. Here's the worry, that a lot of big-name Republicans aren't only leaving key bodies, including the House and the Senate, but trying to draft some big names, well, that's proven very, very difficult. We saw that particularly in Minnesota, where Tim Pawlenty nixed the idea of running for Senate. Take a look. Well, a lot of people are looking what's going on now, Governor, and saying, you should run for the Senate. A lot of big names are passing up such an opportunity, but that in your state they could use you. What do you say?
Well, Neil, I am very interested in public service and service for the common good. There are a lot of different ways to do that, but I'll tell you today that running for the United States Senate in 2018 won't be part of those plans.
All right, so that's a no. To the Federalist writer Bre Payton, Fox News contributor Katherine Timpf. Kat, to you, is this a way for Republicans? It's one thing when incumbents opt to retire or leave. It's quite another when trying to corral some big names to run for those spots, opt not to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's some people who have been explicit about the fact that they don't want to work with Donald Trump, and that is something that I can understand because he seems to see the executive branch as somehow being above the legislative branch and saying that they're supposed to fall in step with him and what he believes, which is always changing, and that's more difficult. But I also think that there's a bit of an identity crisis in the GOP, not just when it comes to being for or against President Trump, but also when it comes to things like spending and civil liberties. People who are voting for GOP candidates might not really know what they're voting for.
I'm wondering, looking at this, Bre, if they're just scared. I mean, if it's going to be a watershed election year, and that could often prove wrong, they're not going to risk it. They're not going to chance it.
Yeah, I think Kat's exactly right. I think the Republican Party is deeply, deeply broken, and I think the reason why so many prominent Republicans are jumping ship is because they're acting like rats when the Titanic was sinking, right? They're deciding to jump off of a sinking ship. I mean, this is a party where its leadership is in complete crisis. No one is in charge. They're not able to fulfill just basic promises that they promised every single constituency when they were running for 8 years. I mean, they even shut down the government a couple of years ago over Obamacare, and yet when they get the chance to be able to repeal it, they get cold feet and act like chickens. So I definitely think that there are two things going on here. It's a crisis with leadership, and the Republican Party is dying a very slow and painful death that we all saw coming with Donald Trump's, rise in 2016. And, Donald Trump broke the party, and now we're just seeing the slow, painful death of it.
Well, I think you're being a little jaded. He also orchestrated this tax cut, so you might not personally like him, but they have a couple of things going their way. But having said that, I do want to bring your attention to Rand Paul, now the latest, to say he can't vote for a continuing resolution. I guess they're going to take up in the House. And if you add the fact that John McCain won't be there because he's still battling this brain tumor and all the treatment he needs for that, you're getting an uphill battle getting this even remotely close to approval in the Senate. What I'm curious, Kat, is who's going to take the heat for that if that happens?
Well, Congress will take the heat for it. Republicans will take the heat for it. I don't think that President Trump will take the heat for it. I don't think he'll take responsibility for it. I think that this all comes back to the identity crisis in the GOP. We saw this already happen with the attempt to repeal and replace Obamacare. That was a complete disaster because there's people in the party who want one thing, people who want another thing. It's not a unified party, and if it's not unified, then how are they going to be unified to pass anything? A
lot of them seem to be hanging their hopes on, and this might be something that it could happen, that because the tax cut was immediate, all features of it are kicking at once, and some of these provisions for companies were so incredibly generous and such a curse of riches to companies that they're doing lots of things beyond just helping their shareholders, that will have an impact just in time save Republicans bacon in November. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that Republicans in Congress need to stop obstructing the winning. I mean, they barely got this tax overhaul done. They barely got it done. And they weren't able to get a lot of other things done, you know, throughout this entire time when they've had both the House and the Senate and a Republican sitting in office in the White House. So, you know, I think that they need to get it together. I think Kat's totally right that there's a lot of competing interests in the party. And there's always going to be competing interests in the party. But the problem and what we are really seeing here is that leadership is completely unable to wield carrots and sticks in this situation. It's really a leadership crisis is the problem that we've been seeing. I mean, there's a rot within the Republican Party, and it didn't just start with Donald Trump. This has been a very long time coming. It started with Boehner and Republicans, you know, who are just happy to appease their donors over their constituents, and they have been sitting there in Washington for decades now and are just unable and unwilling to fulfill their promises and get things done.
All right, I'll put you both down as a maybe on the Republican leadership. Guys, thank you both very, very much. We mentioned the president a little while ago. He's going to be leaving for Pennsylvania soon. He's going to be talking up tax reform and what all these companies have done as a result. That is the trumpet he is blowing to make sure Republicans keep controlling. Will it work? After this.